Well, hello and welcome to the University of Sydney. I'm Hayley Channer and I work for the United States Studies Centre as its Director for Economic Security. Thank you so much for taking the time out of a Friday afternoon to join us today. Our centre is delighted to host today's event in partnership with CyberCX, the largest cybersecurity and cloud services company in the region. And before we start, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. But if anyone knows me, you know that I like to make it a little bit more specific to the event that you're coming to see so that we can understand the connection a little better. And so how I'm going to make cybersecurity relevant to Indigenous Australians is thusly. Indigenous Australians are true innovators. Their technological achievements span various fields, from tools and weapons to land and water management, as well as art and communication. From a civilization that started 60,000 years ago and its innovations to now, we as a people are still innovating and pushing the boundaries of new tools, including in cyberspace. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce both of our speakers this evening. Firstly, I'm going to start with John Barron. Now, many of you will already be familiar with John because you'll have had him in your homes on a Wednesday or a Friday night. John Barron is the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's US politics analyst and co-host of Planet America on ABC TV and the Fireside Chat on ABC News. And working extra hard in the last couple of weeks and months, right down to the wire for 10 days away now. John is the author of 3 books, including Vote for Me, The Long Road to the White House, covering the Obama-Biden campaign, and his political analysis has appeared in US publications, including The Washington Post. John has more than 20 years' experience in the media industry, having hosted several news and current affairs programs, including ABC Fact Check, The Drum, The Future Forum, and The Party Reagan on ABC News 24. Can you please welcome John? And then our guest of honour, retired Admiral Mike Rogers. Admiral Rogers is a global cyber technology and national security policy expert. After serving 37 years in the US Navy, rising to the rank of 4-star Admiral, Mike then served 4 years as Commander, US Cyber Command, and Director of the National Security Agency, NSA. In those roles, he worked with the leadership of the US government, the Department of Defense, and the intelligence community, as well as their Five Eyes and international counterparts. And can I tell you, as someone who myself has worked for our Defence Department, just coordinating the Five Eyes countries to have a meeting at the right time of day is the hardest task in government. Prior to that, he also served as Director of Intelligence for the US Joint Chiefs of Staff and Indo-Pacific Command, focusing on issues associated with China, Russia, and North Korea. Mike now sits on the Global Advisory Board of CyberCX and advises business and academic groups in the areas of cyber, technology, leadership, and crisis response. We are so lucky to have the expertise and professionalism that we have here tonight. I'm going to hand it over to John for a moderated discussion where he'll also ask the audience for your questions. And then after that, we get to have some refreshments outside. So with that, over to you, John.
Thank you, Hayley, and welcome to you all. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting here this evening. It's nice to be back for me at both the United States Studies Centre and the University of Sydney. I noticed the blossoms are on the jacaranda trees. Yeah. Which in the old days meant that it was too late to start studying for your final exams. But fortunately, these days we have ChatGPT, so no need to study at all. We'll talk a little bit about AI, I'm sure, over the course of our discussion, Mike. But first of all, warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
People pretty much know who you are and where you've come from to be here tonight. But just give us a sense, because we hear things like the NSA being tossed around, you know, hid for Congress, you got raked over the coals, you gave this advice or whatever, he's stepping down. So what does the NSA do? How does it fit into, you know, CIA, everything else in that sort of apparatus?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for being here today. I got to question your judgment. It's a Friday afternoon on a beautiful day, and I'm sitting here thinking you're in here and you could be out there. Look at how beautiful it is. So it's a great time of the year to be here in Australia. So look, in the US structure, there are 17 different intelligence organizations. NSA is the largest of the 17. It is double the size of the next largest. If we're honest, it is the largest intelligence organization in the free world. It uses a single discipline, signals intelligence, that's knowledge of communications, radar systems, digital links. It uses a single discipline to generate knowledge and understanding by targeting foreign nationals outside the United States, to generate insight that helps our nation and our friends and allies make better policy choices and perform better on the military battlefields of the world. That's really what the mission of NSA does. In the world of cyber, it was one of the largest. So NSA and Cyber Command, the two organizations I led, they're the largest cyber organizations in the US government, which again means they're the largest cyber organizations in the free world. NSA, very focused on generating deep knowledge and understanding about who are the cyber actors out there, nation states, criminal groups, individuals. What are their strategies? What are the targets they're going after? How are they doing it? NSA, deep technical knowledge about cyber. So we would do things like, hey, we could get into the digital forensics of the malware. We could talk about, hey, here's how the programs are written. Here is how they're designed to operate. This is the flaw in the target network that the adversary thinks they can exploit. Here's how they're doing it. Here's the purpose behind what they're doing. And then NSA would use that deep technical knowledge and that broader understanding of the cyber environment. And we would share those insights with friends and allies like Australia. We would share those insights with the private sector. I spent a lot of time talking to major companies in the United States about, hey, here's what we're seeing. This is what you need to be aware of. And then also I found myself being involved in the development of cybersecurity and technical policy for the United States, because I was perceived as one of the more technical seniors within the US government. Cyber Command is a very traditional military organization. It is, think of it as the Department of Defense or the US military's cyber warfighters. So we defended the Department of Defense's networks, data concentrations, and ensured that we were stopping unauthorized access to our weapon systems and platforms. And then secondly, we developed the offensive cyber tools of the department, and then we use those tools. And we have publicly acknowledged, for example, we have used cyber offensively in the fight against ISIS. We have used cyber offensively with respect to the Russians, et cetera. So I have found myself, bottom line, I worked as an attacker and I worked as a defender. I worked from the execution, from the cold face, if you will, to, okay, how are we going to defend the DoD's networks? And hey, how are we going to get into that target network? Up to sitting here in Canberra, in DC, London, and other places around the world going, okay, what should broader policy, regulatory frameworks for cybersecurity, what should they look like? So
you've got a significant, or had a significant role to play in.
That's right. I'm a
many
nobody.
fields.
I'm a has-been now.
Right, exactly.
But
But let's go back to when you still had the big job at the NSA, and in 2016, because we're obviously thinking a lot about presidential politics with an election less than a fortnight away right now. And the fact that so many of the cyber threats, and whether it was sort of known risks such as phishing emails to John Podesta, for example, whether it was the involvement of foreign actors, the spread of misinformation, and so on. Tell us a little bit about your experiences in that year, particularly when it came to the rather more assertive role that Russia was playing in that year, when you became aware of it and what they were doing and how the Obama administration responded.
So the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, November of 2016, in December of the previous year, December of 2015, about 11 months beforehand, we start seeing some pretty interesting Russian cyber activity, and it seems to be focused on trying to generate understanding around our electoral process, the campaigns, positions, et cetera. And initially we think, okay, we've seen this kind of behavior before. This seems to be consistent. But then by March, we are struck by the scale seems really different. It's much greater. The use of social media is at a magnitude we've never seen before. It's really orchestrated. And then between May and June, we and others, CIA, FBI, some of our foreign counterparts, we start to gain knowledge about specifically what the Russians are doing. What was interesting was they had developed a broad strategy about what they wanted to do with respect to the US election cycle in November of 2016. The program had been expressly approved by Vladimir Putin He had directly approved this and directed the intelligence mechanisms within the government to execute it. And we became aware in the summer of the magnitude of the effort. We became aware of the components of this strategy. And we became aware that part of the strategy was designed to achieve a specific intent. They wanted to influence the election for the express purpose of achieving a desired outcome. The desired outcome in their mind was that Trump was going to win and Clinton was going to lose. By the summer, then we start to have discussions with the president and within the broader US government structure, the national security structure, about, okay, given our knowledge, what do we do with this? And what kind of interaction should we be having with the Russians? What kind of interactions should we be talking about with our citizens writ large? What kind of interactions and information sharing should we be having with the candidates and their parties? And we kind of, by the summer, come up with, okay, so here's how we ought to go forward. The biggest, if I look back, I wish we had done differently. I can remember a meeting in August, which, normally everybody's on vacation, so it's bad when you're meeting in the White House with all the leadership in August. But we're having a discussion, and the core question is getting to be, so what are we going to do with the Russians? Are we going to tell them this? Are we going to take action against them? Are we going to do this publicly? Are we going to do this privately? What's the US strategy here? We're talking about this. Ultimately, the decision is made. President Obama happened to be meeting with Vladimir Putin at the end of September, so 2 months before the election. And the government makes the decision, we're going to have the two leaders talk about this directly and privately. And Obama's basically going to tell him, we know what you're doing. Here's the outline of what you're doing. We're well aware of this. We're telling you to stop it. And if you don't stop it, we're going to take action. But we're giving you the opportunity to stop it now before we go public about this. The reality is, in the next 2 months, we don't see the Russians change a damn thing. They just keep doubling down, and they continue to do this. They create this massive effort that's designed to penetrate the campaigns and extract emails that might be embarrassing, and then they publicly release them. They're using surrogates and cutouts to promulgate some of the information that they're stealing. They are using misinformation to attempt to inflame our citizens and to attempt to manipulate their views on different issues. They're attempting to use disinformation and misinformation to really keep us fragmented and divided. And they don't stop. We've caught them, for example, trying to do some things around some states' voter registration rolls, et cetera. And then in the aftermath of the election in November, two things happen. We have a discussion again with the president about, okay, now we need to take specific action. So we have a discussion, and around the 1st, if my memory is correct, around the 1st of December, we announce a series of sanctions. We expel, I think we expelled something like 150 Russian diplomats and government officials from the United States. We closed down several consulate facilities where we're trying to signal them, we warned you that this was unacceptable to us, and we are taking, by historic standards, pretty significant actions. We're literally expelling you. We're shutting down facilities. We're sanctioning you. And we knew the Russians were going to respond, so they did the same thing to us. They threw some of our people out of Moscow. They closed down some of our consulates. And the second thing was, in December, President Obama says, look, I want a single integrated comprehensive report that outlines exactly what they did and what we saw. And he said, I want to do that because I want to make sure we have a record of this. And then I want this to be briefed to the president-elect. I want this to be discussed directly with President Trump. So I can remember we go to the Oval Office, myself, the director of national intelligence, the director of the CIA, John Brennan, the director of the FBI, Jim Comey, myself, the four of us sit down and we walk president, the vice president, the national security team, and we walk them through, okay, here's what we saw, here's the timeline. And he says, okay, thanks, you've done exactly what I asked you to. Now I want the four of you to go up and I want you to have a personal discussion with President-elect Trump. So then we go up to Trump Tower. My memory is the very beginning. It might have been the end of December, but for some reason I'm thinking it was the very beginning of January. Again, he is inaugurated around the 20th of January. And we walk President Trump through this. And we tell him, hey, here's exactly what we saw. The idea being, hey, sir, we believe they are likely to try to do this again. Therefore, while you are the president, we need to think about what is our strategy going to be, because we think this is going to occur again. Our insight or analysis to you is this is not something isolated. Our efforts to date have been ineffective. They're not backing off, and we don't think they're going to back off in the future. President Trump thanks us for our input. The challenge with him was he was always a little bit concerned of, so are you telling me that your view is I didn't win legitimately? And we're saying, no, sir, that's not what we're saying. We're not in a position to say that. I said, look, we're foreign intelligence organizations. I don't assess the reaction of the citizens of our nations to this. I'm a foreign intelligence entity. We don't do collection and analysis domestically against US persons. That's not our role, sir. I can't tell you what the impact was. Are you saying that you think the Russians have some kind of leverage over me? Sir, that's not what we're saying. We're walking you through what the Russians did to achieve a desired outcome. And then the thing that really got him was, are you telling me that they wanted me to win? Yes, sir. We are telling you that everything we have seen, and we have really high confidence in this. Sir, they wanted you to win.
This, of course, at the same time, Mike, where the Steele dossier is going around.
Oh, yeah.
And Jim Comey, who you're working with through this period as well on this approach, he's also going to Trump Tower, and he's saying, well, sir, there's this.
It was all part of the same session after we finished this, and we segued into, okay, Jim, you get to brief him on the
So
dossier.
understandable that he's a little bit sensitive right now. Did you ever, or did you decide that's not my job to try and connect dots here? I mean, it's all starting to look a little bit sus right now, isn't it?
No, I mean, look, the dossier, literally, I can remember, so Clapper, Brennan, myself, and Comey are the final four to approve all this. And the agreement we had among the four of us was all four of us have to approve this. Nobody has a lock on this, guys. We're all equals on this. We all got to approve this. And I was very direct with them. If we don't share all the information each of us have, I will not put my organization's label on this report. I refuse to participate in something in which we're hiding information from each other. So guys, you better be open about this. I'm just not going down this road. So literally, it's like right around Christmas time when we're finishing the final report before we talk to the president. And I hear for the first time this dossier comes up, and the FBI is saying, hey, look, we got this dossier. Part of the concern of the FBI, Jim, and he wasn't the only one of the four of us, but was, hey, look, this has been floating around for some period of time. This is about to become public knowledge. We had multiple media outlets that had it and were saying they were going to publish it. And Jim's view was, hey, look, we need to include this in the report. And I had a slightly different view. I said, we didn't use this at all to base our conclusions on. We have no knowledge of the accuracy or veracity of this. Our intelligence analytic tradecraft says to me, we should not include this within the body of the report because we never even discussed this or reviewed this. However, if your guy's view is that this is going to become a matter of public knowledge and he ought to be made aware of it, then I would suggest put it as an annex to the report. In the report itself, highlight this in no way was a factor in our analysis. And then when we go up to see him, Jim, you have a discussion. And I wasn't the only one that said this, I was the only one, but the agreement among the four of us was, Jim, after we walk him through the report, you stay and have a second session with him and walk him through this. And the point to make is, we don't know if this is accurate or not. But what we do know is this is about to be made public and it is likely to create a significant reaction. And Mr. President-elect, we don't want you to be blindsided. We think you should have awareness of this. That was the whole idea.
We could spend hours talking about just 2015, 16, 17, I'm sure, Mike. But let's pivot into just some broader observations about these key characters that you're dealing with. Because I'm sure a lot of people are very interested to know from, we see one side of President Obama or President Trump or President Biden, Vice President Harris.
All very similar people, all four of them very, very similar.
So they're not similar.
In what ways? That was supposed to be humor. Come on, did you wake up?
That's NSA humor. You will laugh. Can you give us a sense of what they're like to deal with, the personalities that you engage with, their various strengths and weaknesses as you found it?
So I worked with all four of them. Look, President Obama was a constitutional lawyer by background and a community activist before he became senator. In fact, we're both from the state of Illinois. So for example, he assimilated a lot through reading. He was you could tell he was a lawyer. He would just assimilate written products like there was no tomorrow. So for example, when you brief the president, normally you provide the president a written summary of the interaction 24 to 48 hours in advance so that the president is prepared and we maximize our time because he doesn't have a lot. He's got 1,000 issues and he doesn't have a lot of time. And President Obama always read the prep material. He would literally walk in and say, okay, Mike, I've read the prep material. Here's the 4 issues I want us to focus on. He was always very focused. He believed strongly in professionalism about, hey, look, we're loyal to each other and we're loyal to the mission. We're a team. We don't attack each other because we had one serious issue at a time where the only time I've ever seen him get agitated. And if you didn't know him, you wouldn't think he was agitated. But if you knew him, and I said this to the chief of staff after the session, I said, he was really pissed, wasn't he? And he said, yeah, I'm not going to get into it. But by his standards,
it was a twitch.
He was really pissed. He also believed strongly in consensus. He would often say to all of us in the national security team, I want you guys to debate and come up with a consensus before you come to me. That's your job. I shouldn't be the consensus maker. You guys should be doing that. On the other hand, there was always, you never got through to Barack the individual. I don't mean that in any way disrespect, but there was always this wall. You just never, he's very professional, very personable. He would always talk to you. He'd always say hello. He'd always ask me, Mike, how you doing? But you never really got, and I tend to be, I like people. I like talking to people. So I would, for example, we were both from Chicago. So I would talk to him about Chicago sports. I was from the north side of town, which meant I was a Chicago Cubs fan. He was from the south side of town, which meant he was a White Sox fan.
And they hate the Cubs. So
I talked about the Cubs and the White Sox. He just wouldn't bite. He really wasn't interested. Vice President then Biden, when I worked with him, had been in the government and national security longer than anybody else in the room, much longer than President Obama, as an example, but much longer than me. That's literally what he had done his entire life. So he understood the processes. He understood the Hill, probably better than President Obama. He had been part of it longer. Because of his work on the Council on Foreign Relations, he had a pretty well-established vision of the world and a set of principles that he thought that should govern or shape U.S. policy choices. He also had pretty firm views, and I will say he would react sometimes if you told him something that he fundamentally didn't agree with or didn't like. Obama never would. He might disagree, but he'd just say, okay. You would sometimes get a reaction out of Vice President Biden.
What was a Biden reaction like?
Well, I'll only say this. I did one session. I was briefing something that it was very early stages. It was a potential really bad thing. And I went to my bosses and said, I think we need to brief this to the president and the national security team because they need to be aware of this. I'm going to brief them on the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario was really bad. But I'm also going to brief them on what I think is the most likely. And then we'll try to generate more knowledge over time. So we're having this initial discussion. The Secretary of Defense tees me up. President Obama says, go ahead. And as I'm getting through this presentation, the vice president just keeps dropping the F-bomb. And to the point where the president says to him, Joe, could we let Mike get through the presentation? So you always knew where Vice President Biden was on an issue. He generally didn't mask his feelings. President Trump, he had never worked in government before. He had never served in DC. He was unfamiliar with, again, not a criticism, just an observation. He was totally unfamiliar with the mechanisms of government. He was totally unfamiliar with process. He was totally unfamiliar with culture and the norms of behavior in the government. It just wasn't his frame of reference. He's a business guy. His bias when he came in was, it doesn't seem to be particularly efficient. It doesn't seem to be particularly effective. And as a business guy, I'm all about outcomes and efficiency and effectiveness. So he, for example, would say, I'm not interested in a 50-year update on the background of this issue. What I want to know is what's the issue, what's your recommendation to me, and what are you asking me to do? He was always very outcome focused every session. He didn't care. Consensus was not a primary shaper for him. He would listen to the inputs, and then he would make a decision. I had never seen an individual who was, again, I don't mean it as a criticism, he was really comfortable making decisions relatively quickly and often on really significant issues. Now, One challenge with him was he often was influenced by the last person he talked to. And over time, you could watch some of the people around him, because they knew that, they all tried to make sure they were the last person to talk to him. For me, that was a little frustrating in the sense, hey, we got a process, we're all supposed to provide inputs. And then the president asks questions, voices concerns, disagreements, we go back and forth, and then the president makes a decision. And we execute that decision. He's a big guy, he's a tall guy. He is a hale and hearty guy. He's a little bit gregarious in the sense that he would walk up, gives you a big handshake, he would slap me on the back, he'd punch me in the shoulder. Mike, how you doing? You got a sense that you could connect at a personal level with. He at least projected that. Vice President Harris, I worked with her as a senator. She was on our oversight committee for the National Security Agency as a senator on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. You could tell she was a prosecutor. So she assimilated information very quickly. She asked very hard, very focused questions. She was always prepared. But a challenge I found at times was, because she was a prosecutor, she liked to ask questions to get a yes and no that would drive you to an outcome that she wanted. And I would say sometimes, well, ma'am, this isn't black and white. It's not yes or no. There's a lot more complexity in this. Admiral, I asked you yes or no. And part of the culture as a military guy, you support the Congress and their oversight rule. You're culturally, you're taught you don't publicly get into it with these guys. You just answer their questions. In essence, as a military guy, you're just, okay, suck it up. Yes, no. It's just what you got to do. It's their theater, so to speak. And, very, very intelligent. Don't get me wrong, very smart, quickly assimilated a lot of information, very articulate in the way she would break down a problem set, and then the way she would ask questions to get to the outcome that she thought was the right one. On the other hand, had not had, she was in law enforcement as a district attorney for the city of San Francisco. Then she became the attorney general for the state of California. Then she became a senator. And then she didn't finish her term as senator because she ran for president in 2020. She was then subsequently asked by President Biden to be her running mate on the ticket. And she ran with President Biden. And in 2020, they won the presidency and she became the vice president.
Let's talk about when you were dealing with Donald Trump once he became president. And there was that moment, of course, the famous Helsinki moment when he was asked about the NSA and the 16 other agencies' assessments that Russia had meddled in the election the previous year. And Trump effectively said, well, Vladimir says that they didn't, and I believe him. Not Mike, not Jim, not the rest. How did you feel about that?
Listen, if you can't live in a world in which other people have different opinions, you got a lot of problems. And my attitude was, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I feel really comfortable with what we did. I am very proud of the fact that each independent assessment that has subsequently been conducted validated the analysis that we originally did. I feel very good about it. I'm glad to talk about it. And my view is, I'm not going to let stuff like that bother me. He's entitled to his opinion. He's entitled to his views. He'll ultimately be held accountable by the voters, and they'll make a decision about what their opinion is. I'm just not going to get wrapped around the act. It's just the way I'm wired. My attitude is always focus on the mission. Never forget about the objective. Keep focused. Work, work, work. Don't get sidetracked by, oh my God, he's unhappy, or oh my God, he's frustrated, or oh my God, he doesn't like. And part of the challenge was, I always thought was, he just could not separate himself from the analysis. His core takeaway was, you're saying that the Russians I fundamentally reject that. And so as a result of that, he tended to reject the whole thing. He found it hard to separate that.
Yeah. So what about when dealing with him in the cyber realm? Because Trump famously, of course, he gets the internet printed for him each day before he reads it. He doesn't read it off screens. If he tries to tweet, it comes out as kafefe. So he has somebody do the tweets or the truths for him. So not the biggest tech guy.
Right.
He understood things like Space Command, though. So he could deal with the kind of the physical idea of a threat that is up there. Could he deal with?
He had opinions. I'm not sure that I would argue that.
You tell me how he understood these various threats that you had to come to him.
He's not. Look, he was one of the things that was interesting about him. I never met a leader before who was so comfortable in acknowledging he didn't know something. You would brief him and he would literally say, I didn't know that. And sometimes there were things you might scratch your head and go, really? But he was very comfortable. He would say, hey, look, I don't know that. But his analysis to you was, but I didn't know it because it wasn't important. So it's no big deal. He was open and willing to listen. I never once had a situation where he shut me down, for example, on the Russians. He would say to me, Mike, you know I'm in a different place than you are, but tell me what you think. And my attitude was, guys, that's all you can ask for from a boss. He's giving you the opportunity to provide an input. It's his right to decide if he agrees or disagrees. In the end, he'll be judged by the outcomes. The biggest thing to me was, we're not going to do anything that is illegal, immoral, or unethical. Aside from that, if it's something that I don't agree with, he's the duly elected president of the United States. It's his right to make those decisions, and he will be ultimately held accountable for the decision. It's not my job, which I thought was part of the challenge. I watched all these people in DC who, we've got to stop him from X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, stop. Our system works when everybody does their job. When you try to do somebody else's job, then we got problems. Could we just focus on each of us doing our job? And in the end, he and all of us are going to be held accountable. And that's the way our system works. When you try to short circuit it, you really run into issues. Even if you're trying to short circuit it, my characterization, for what you believe are very valid reasons. I certainly acknowledge that, but it was an area that really frustrated me. I mean,
given that, how do you feel when you hear former colleagues like General Mark Milley, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Kelly, somebody you know well?
Right, both of them are my friends. We've known each other a long time. We served together during the Trump administration.
They're not leaving, well, they are leaving it up to the voters, but they're saying, but voters bear this in mind.
Right.
This guy is a fascist to the core. This guy is an authoritarian, has dictatorial tendencies. Others like John Bolton, he's unfit for office. Others like Rex Tillerson, he's a fucking moron. So clearly you take a different approach.
Yep.
Explain how you feel about them taking that approach. And
so
what do you think?
First, I acknowledge it is the right of every American citizen to voice their opinion. Doesn't matter how senior you are, how junior you are. It doesn't matter what color you are, what sex you are, what your orientation is. Every one of us has the right to voice our opinion on different issues. Having said that, I believe that there's also a responsibility as a senior military member to ensure that the United States military remains apolitical, that we do not in any way create a perception among our citizens that its military somehow has a particular political orientation or a particular viewpoint about our political leaders. So for me, while I acknowledge my peers certainly have the right to express their opinion, I have consistently said, for me, I do not believe that this is appropriate, because my concern is nobody calls me Mike Rogers. Everybody calls me Admiral Rogers. Look, every time I speak, I know that some people in the audience go, see, this is a senior military guy. This is the view of the military. And I'm not trying to speak for the military. I'm giving you my opinion, but I realize that I am forever now labeled and known as Admiral Rogers. I don't have a problem with that. I'm proud and grateful that my nation was willing to give me that opportunity and give me that kind of responsibility. But I also to me, that means I have a responsibility to make sure that the institution that I supported, the US military, remains apolitical and is perceived by our citizens as not involved and not entwined in the political discourse. Now, don't get me wrong, I have opinions. Now, my view is I will express those opinions through the money that I provide to different viewpoints, through the volunteer work that I do to support different viewpoints. That's how I will communicate my perspective. But I am not going to do it by standing up, hey, I work for the guy, and let me tell you what I think. My view is, again, do your job. That ain't my job. And I'm a little concerned that at times, if we're not careful, and this is not unique to, this has been going on for a little while now. It's just something that I feel very strongly about. So, for example, I have been approached by both campaigns. Hey, would you be willing to show support for? And I said, look, no disrespect to anybody, but I don't do that. I just won't. Now, many of my peers have, and I acknowledge that. But for me, I'm just not comfortable in that.
One of the reasons given by Mark Milley, certainly, and implied by John Kelly in his comments to Michael Schmidt this week, was that this isn't about politics, this is about the Constitution. And President Trump was asking people to declare their fealty to him personally without understanding the military's particular relationship to the Constitution, but every American's relationship to the Constitution. You're not compelled by those arguments?
My first comment would be, so you're the only individuals who saw this behavior or have commented on it? There's plenty of people who have commented on these kinds of things. So why do we feel as uniforms, we got to add to this? Again, just saying for me. I'm like, guys, so tell me why we feel we got to add to this. Because I would argue.
So ironically, it's the independence of the military that makes it powerful but impossible, in a sense.
Not impossible, but it's not independence. It's credibility. It's the fact that the military tradition in the United States is viewed as the most effective. If you look at the polls historically, the military within our nation is viewed as among the most trustworthy, most effective organizations. And my view is, guys, I want to keep that relationship with the citizens we serve, okay? I don't want them to suddenly start looking at us like, they sure seem to be involved in politics. Why are they signing letters? Why are they going to conventions? Why are they making statements? Again, they have the right to do that. But I'm a little bit concerned that, guys, if we're not careful, this extends this broader politicization that we're watching in our society as a whole. It extends itself into an institution that I believe is incredibly foundational to the security and safety and the well-being of our citizens. And I don't want to compromise that. I don't want to impair the effectiveness, our ability to execute our mission, because I don't want future presidents going, so can I trust you in the future? Or are you going to be making public comments about these? Because I will say, when you're sitting in the Oval Office and he's at the desk, or we're sitting on the sofa together and we're walking through a particular issue, you have some pretty direct conversations, and you'll hear the senior most leadership of the nation will lay out some thought process and rationales that if they thought, hey, are you going to write a book in the future? Or are you going to take a political stance in the future? They might not be so willing, again, to communicate. And it's that open communication that helps lead to better decisions. I'm like, guys, I don't want to stop that flow. I don't want to create distrust. So for me, could we just stick to our lane? We'll let others who also have access to them, we'll let them weigh in on their views. And that's their role. That's their right. I just argue it's not our role.
I've got one more question
Sure.
before we throw it open to the room. So if you've got a question you got in mind that we haven't addressed or something you'd like to expand on, signal it, and we've got a couple of roving mics to bring around. But Mike, given that, and given that clearly when President Trump came to office in 2017, a lot of national security expertise was ruled out of contention of serving in the Trump administration, people that had served for Reagan and the Bushes and so on, because they had been openly critical of Trump during the primaries, because they had said he was unfit for office and he shouldn't be elected. It meant that Trump did draw more heavily than previous administrations.
Yeah, but have you seen, my comment would be, how many political leaders have you seen that have brought people who have criticized them close to them? I mean, that's
right,
not
of course,
unique to him.
of course. Oh, I
does that.
Sure. Makes perfect sense. But as a result of that, Trump therefore did bring in a lot of military in those senior roles, more so than previous administrations.
Initially.
And then there were more political appointees when some of those military people didn't do what he said. A second Trump term. What does that look like? Because one of the concerns that people express about the possible return of Donald Trump to a second term is, well, there were guardrails because there were good men and women around Trump the first time round. He gradually got rid of them and replaced them with political hacks and sycophants and members of the family. A second Trump term with, no more to give.
Well, I wouldn't.
This guy, how do you populate?
I wouldn't totally agree with that characterization. For example, I am in the Mueller report because twice he approached me and he wanted me to do something. And I told him, sir, I'm not going to do that. I'm not comfortable. I don't think it's appropriate. Here's why. And to his credit, the first time he said, okay, it was in a secure call. He had called me about something. The second time I'm in the Oval Office with him and he literally says, hey, I want to have a one-on-one with you. And you're in trouble when it's just you and the president in the office and he's coming out from behind the desk. And he asked me to do it again. I said, sir, I'm just not comfortable. I don't think it's appropriate. I'm not going to do it. And again, he never pushed back. I found that if you were strong with him, if you were consistent with him, and if you explained the basis of your answer, while he didn't like it, he would say to me, hey, I really disagree. Hey, I may be frustrated, but okay. I never once had him say to me, change, okay, fine, I'm going to fire you. Or, hey, I want you to I'm going to override you. He just never did that. I found if you stood up. Now, having said that, again, because I'd had a little interaction with him before he became the president, that ended up becoming helpful for me in the sense that he didn't know most of the people on the team before he got there. He at least had interacted. Because of the four of us that went up to see him in the beginning of January, on the 21st of January, his first day
You're
as
the
president,
survivor.
only Comey and I are left. And as I kidded Jim in our first national security kind of meeting with him, as we're looking around the table, I'm going, well, this is going to be different. And, 3 months later, Jim isn't there anymore. And I'm going, Jim, what happened? I'm the only one of the intelligence team, the leadership that's still here.
So given that philosophy you've outlined for us, why would you go and work for Trump again?
Listen, what I tell people is everyone should listen when they are called to service. I truly believe that it is in the best interest of the nation to get good people. I'm like, guys, I'm not getting into a what if, I'm not speculating. I encourage everybody. When I get asked by others, what about? I said, I would encourage you to listen. And then you will make a decision about, do you feel comfortable? Do you not feel comfortable? Does this match your personal beliefs? Does this match your personal philosophy? Because one of the things, and maybe it was just because I was a military guy, my view was I felt very comfortable with what I was doing. I felt very comfortable with my ability to maintain professionalism, integrity during both the two presidents I worked for. I felt very strongly about what the appropriate role was for me, and neither of them pushed back when I tried to execute that to the best of my knowledge, even if in the case of President Trump, he didn't always agree. But so I just didn't feel that pressure in some ways. Some did. And on the other hand, look, I didn't have the relationship or work. I didn't work in the White House. I didn't work with them as directly as some. I'm the first to acknowledge that. So perhaps that was the reason. But I encourage people, you should always listen, because look, forget politics. We need good people to serve the citizens of our nation. We need good people to help create a better world. We need good people to work with our friends and allies to see what can we do together. I don't want the second team. I want the first team. So.
Indeed so. So time for some questions. And one quick note on that, just because I have asked long, self-indulgent questions doesn't mean you can. We haven't got time. We don't want to hear what you think with a "don't you think" added to the end. Yeah. A direct question would be great.
It's always great. I can remember one time in the Senate, I literally said, Senator, was there a question in there? I mean, this was like a 9-minute, right. 17-point, anyway.
They're looking at their time, not your time.
Exactly. There was their time.
In the Senate. So over here.
Hi, Admiral. My name's Jersey. Thank you for your remarks. And so my question follows on from your discussion about how you try to resist the trend of politicizing your position, while others are kind of doing the opposite. So
remember, in their view, they're not politicizing. Now, their response, if you ask them, was, I'm not politicizing it. I am providing an honest assessment based on my direct interaction. That is how they would characterize it. And that's fair. That's a fair statement.
Yeah. So my question is that given you have the opposite view as some of your peers, why don't you consider making a kind of more public case, or maybe like a greater private case against them doing this, to basically push them towards a better, less depoliticized position? And second of all, do you think it's even possible, given the longer term trend, to depoliticize all of these institutions? As you say, it's a long-term trend.
So first of all, look, this is a conversation that as military leaders, we would have regularly with each other while we're in uniform, about what's the appropriate role for us as senior leaders, as public servants, as members of an administration, not political members, but as members of the administration. We would have these conversations about what is the appropriate role. And I find it humorous somewhat when many of these individuals were inside the institution, their attitude was, not only should you not do it when you're on active duty, when you're wearing the uniform, hey, you shouldn't do it when you retire. And I believe that. I always argued, as I told you before, challenge is I'm always going to be Admiral Rogers. It's not going to be, hey, when he was wearing a uniform, now he's Mike. Mike, tell us what you think. So look, this is a well-known topic. It's heavily discussed. And even now, we'll talk with each other about, differences of opinions. But on the other hand, I acknowledge they have the right to do what they think is right. I'm not, I don't like telling others, hey, look, I think you're fundamentally wrong or flawed. I'd say, hey, could we walk through what the second and third order effects of doing this are? And are we comfortable with those outcomes?
Admiral, welcome to Australia. Thanks
Good
for
to be
telling
back,
us a little bit
sir.
about America. We know nothing, of course. I was in the U.S. Army, so I should start by saying, sir, I have a question.
Oh, so what was
My-
your MOS or your designator or special?
Military intelligence, sir.
An MI guy. Okay.
Now, first question is, as a senior officer in the
Mhm.
United States military, at any point in your career were you asked to stand up and swear that you would support the U.S. Constitution?
Oh, every time you're promoted?
Great.
And
I haven't
every
got that
time, can
out
I
of the
make one
way.
last question?
The second thing,
Can I make one last point, sir? The other thing that's important, when you become a 3 or 4 star and you are nominated by the president and you are confirmed by the Senate, in your nomination package to the Senate, you specifically sign the following agreement: that I will always testify truthfully to the best of my knowledge, and that I will not hide or attempt to falsify. I mean, they put it in writing because at times it's interesting. So you're testifying, you're a member of a team, perhaps they're asking you, hey, your position on a policy that they may disagree with, and you're asking yourself, okay, what am I supposed to do? And you always remember, okay, go back to the agreement. Hey, you always tell the truth. My job is to tell the truth to the legitimate oversight of our nation. Sir.
secondly, as an admiral, 4-star admiral, there's still one person with a higher rank. That's the chief of staff. You have said you're going to support the Constitution. We had an instance on the 6th of January.
Not a higher rank.
Sorry?
That's not a higher rank. That's not correct.
All
We
right,
have different statutory responsibilities. As a combatant commander, I have a different set of statutory responsibilities than a service chief, but I'm not subordinate to a service chief. My boss was the Secretary of Defense, not my service chief. That's the way our system
If the
works.
president were to order you to do something, is that within the chain of command for him to do?
The president can, look, I work as a combatant commander. I work directly for the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense works directly for the President of the United States.
Okay.
I don't work for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I don't work for the Joint Chiefs. The president has the legal authority to direct the secretary, to direct me to do the following things. I then have a role to decide, do I believe the order is lawful? Do I believe it is ethically and morally correct? And then I have the option to say, I'm not going to execute it. Now, then I also have the accountability of that decision. It then becomes appropriate. If the president says, for example, well, guess what? I got a different view. I am relieving you. That is the president's right. That's part of the deal you sign up to when you become among the senior-most leaders. You acknowledge that you may pay a personal price for executing something you believe is appropriate. And that is what you sign up for. I never had a problem with that. I always believe, hey, if they want to fire me, they want to relieve me, that's their right. I'm going to keep working the best I can, and we'll see how it all plays out.
I was trying to box you in, but you got out very cleverly. You're upholding the Constitution. We had a president of the United States who ordered the vice president of the United States to do something, and he stood up and said, sorry, I cannot do that because that is contrary to my
He felt
constitutional
it wasn't a
obligation.
lawful right. Felt it
And he
wasn't a
just said, if
lawful
he
right.
did that to you, you'd say, I can't do that. And he'd say, well, give me the stars back, mate, and go out the door.
Yep, he has that right.
And that's that. Now, here's the final question. You know the man. You know the
Mhm.
circumstances that he will confront and has confronted as a president. Is the individual who may or may not occupy the office after the 21st of January capable of rationalizing before he blurts out something that could result in a military confrontation somewhere in the world that could then pose a real risk of growing rapidly into something that nobody
Look,
wants?
I never questioned his ability to execute the job. I never saw anything that led me to believe that he couldn't execute the job. Now, I didn't always agree with the way he would choose to do it at times. I didn't always necessarily agree with the things he would say, but I never saw anything that led me to believe this guy can't execute the responsibilities of the office. I just never saw that, or at least from a commander-in-chief perspective. The other thing you got to remember, one thing that makes him really different from most politicians in my experience, they try to speak in measured ways that don't necessarily generate a contrary reaction. They don't want to spur opposition. He, on the other hand, he loved getting reaction. He just fed off it. So at times you would watch him and he would say things to me where I'm thinking, he's really enjoying the reaction. He really loves the social media response. He really loves the way the media, he just really viewed himself as a contrarian and he liked stirring the pot. I've never seen another politician that likes stirring the pot the way he does. He totally was different in that regard. So I tell people, you got to learn to differentiate between what he says and what he does. So for example, in Helsinki, he's talking to Vladimir Putin. He's saying, hey, look, I don't agree with my intelligence structure that's telling me that you were attempting to influence the election. At the same time, in the first year of the Trump administration, he put more sanctions in place against Russia than the Obama second team had done in 4 years. There was always this dichotomy. And I tell people, look, you got to remember it's his left and right sphere are a little different. He has no problem saying one thing and doing something else. He's very comfortable with that. And so I try to tell people, when you're assessing him, as important as the verbiage is, you cannot forget the action, because the two of them sometimes are not always aligned, if that makes sense. Sorry.
I wonder, Mike, you seem to have it seems to be an occupational hazard with a lot of people, long service in the military, that they become students of history.
Yeah, I like that. Sorry.
President Trump doesn't seem to have a deep wellspring of knowledge of history. I think it's fair to say. So much so
That's not his thing.
there are times when
Not his thing.
when he seems to be unwittingly echoing extremist language. Possibly didn't realize this was something Lindbergh said at a neo-Nazi rally before the Second World War. Things like that. A lot of people point to that and say these are among the things that make him unfit to serve in the office of presidency of the United States. A lack of curiosity, a lack of knowledge. What do you feel about that? Because you must have had to fill in a lot of blanks for him.
You talk to him about, well, sir, here's the background of that, X, Y, or Z. Again, guys, I saw nothing that led to me to believe he couldn't execute the duties. Now, does he have a different worldview than some? Yep. Does he have a different set of experiences than most of his peers? Yep. Does he, at times, and like I said, he was very upfront about what he didn't know. To me, that on the one hand, it was a positive. On the other hand, at times you scratch your head a little bit going, really? But the system, part of the challenge here is he was so fundamentally different, he really shook up the system. And the system didn't like, in many ways, the fact that he was so different. And he had this bias about, he truly believed the deep state. Literally had a conversation with him one time where he had been tweeting about NSA, and part of my workforce got really agitated. And I kept telling them, guys, we're not responding to tweets. That's not the way we're doing our job, okay? If the president is unhappy, he will reach out and tell me that. And he does. Look, he calls me on secure, we do meetings. He lets me know when he's unhappy about something. But I did approach him and say, sir, these men and women are doing their best job to give you an accurate sense of what is going on in the world around us and what are the factors that should shape the decision-making that you have to make. That's their job. They take it very seriously. They don't do politics. They try to give you the most objective assessment they can. They don't do politics. Many of them could be working in the commercial world and making a whole lot like our workforce. I'm going, sir, the Silicon Valley is hunting these guys left and right. They could be making a whole lot more money on the outside. And yet they want to serve the nation. They want to make a difference. And sir, to create the value and the insight that helps shape better policy, that helps you make hopefully better decisions, we need quality people. I don't want to lose quality people. And he literally said to me, well, I'm not talking about you, Mike. And I'm thinking, oh man, sir, that's not what I'm talking about. This isn't about me. This is about, again, he tended often to personalize things in a way that you're going, well, sir, I didn't mean this as something personal.
Question over
Just to
here.
get somebody over there.
Yep.
Hello.
Hi, ma'am.
I'm Sienna Martinez.
Hi, Sienna.
Thank you for enabling this conversation today. I have a lot of family in the US, both in red and blue states. So to actually hear your personal account and not just sort of looking at sort of microdosing, micro doses of very isolated news reporting, I think is very important for us. But I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on sort of, I guess, intelligence community and then information flows within government agencies and entities. So I used to work in Premier's cabinet in the cybersecurity unit in West Australia. and now I've resided in Sydney. But what I saw is that sort of up the top, and we worked with ACSC and then also servicing government entities and critical infrastructure. But what I saw is that only those with security clearances, very high security clearances, sort of were allowed to sit in within war rooms and then hear different sort of intelligence reporting. But then those government entities that then also hold critical data and citizen data and different security architecture and whatnot. And I guess the increase in which foreign nationals sort of infiltrate different supply chains, I'm not sure, or I haven't come to a conclusion or a response in my mind that would enable that information flow outside of those rooms. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that based on your experience.
So for me, this was something in some ways I was a little different from my peers. I said, look, I don't care about seniority. I care about knowledge and insight in connecting the smartest person on an issue with the decision maker or the policymaker. For example, I really believe that when I became a 4-star admiral, and I used to say this to the team, my job is I stopped being the smartest guy in the room a long, long time ago. You guys, you men and women, you have much more knowledge of the day-to-day than I lost that decades ago. I'm supposed to be the strategic vision guy. I'm supposed to be the prioritization guy. I'm supposed to be, hey, how do we build a team? How do we come up with a strategy? Then how do we execute it? And I'm supposed to be the interface with some of those more senior people on the outside world. So when it came to, for example, information sharing, I was very adamant. Let's not get sidetracked by seniority. Let's identify who's got the most knowledge and let's align them with who can help in the private sector. I tried to do the same thing, for example, I remember I did this a couple of times with President Obama, where he would ask me a question. I would say, sir, I can give you an answer, but I think you would really you would gain more insight if I could get you to spend 15 minutes with 2 individuals I know who are really smart on this issue. In part because I wanted to motivate the workforce that, hey, one of the really neat things about potentially working in the intelligence world, you want to go brief the President of the United States? Hey, we get to do that. Most people don't. Hey, you want to highlight to senior decision makers in the military, to other nations, et cetera, the value of the work you've been doing for so long. Hey, let's give you that opportunity. In part, I thought this would really help with retention. It would really motivate the workforce. And I thought it would help decision maker get better knowledge and insight, because I'm the first to admit I'm not the smartest guy. Not that I ever was necessarily, but I lost that deep, specific technical knowledge a long time ago. So hopefully that answers it a little bit.
Mike, we're just about out of time, but I
Story of my life.
knowing that
Now you sound like my wife. Michael, we're just about out of
it's just about time to go, Mike. The Uber's
Come on, Michael, we gotta go.
Given that you have retained this interest and engagement in both cybersecurity and cyber safety down to a very sort of individual level as well, I wonder, any sort of parting thoughts that it's easy for us to focus on the personalities like presidents and former presidents and big sort of international sort of attempts at election interference or misinformation spreading or disinformation spreading. But is there something that you kind of feel as though, whether it's the organizations you deal with or the governments you deal with, that people should be thinking some more about, whether it is AI, whether it is deep fakes, whether it is our practices as organizations or individuals? Are there any things that you sort of think, okay, Trump's interesting and scary or funny, depending on your point of view, but here's something else.
Can be both.
Yeah.
I would highlight 3 things. Number 1, we all need to come to a better awareness and understanding of the impact of technology, because that's only going to grow and it's going to happen faster. It's going to happen much more broadly, and it's going to have an impact on all of our lives. And it's going to transcend our business life, our work life, our personal life. So we got to get more comfortable and knowledgeable about technology. Number 2, we have got to figure out as a society how we operate as a free and open society, as a democracy in which freedom of speech and the rights of the individual are core foundational building blocks for our nations. We have got to figure out how we become smarter and more discerning about the information environment and the world around us. You have got to stop believing something just because you saw it or read it. Those days are long gone, people. And yet I literally have this conversation with some members of my family where they say, hey, so I believe the following. And I said, well, what leads you to believe that? I saw it, I read it. And I'm going, well, what leads you to believe that that's accurate? I saw it, I read it. I'm going, guys, can we realize that we are living in a world in which there are a lot of viewpoints, that social media and our media structures are almost as politicized as the broader societies that they actually report on and support, and that we've got a large group of individuals, both externally as well as domestically, that are trying to use technology to work against our freedoms, to try to manipulate our perceptions and behaviors. Can we accept that that is a foundational dynamic in the world we're living in? So could we stop believing everything that we read or see and ask ourselves, so what leads me to believe that's true? What other sources could I go to say, well, what do they think? You know, one of our challenges, we have all created mini echo chambers. Almost all of us, we go to the same sources for news and insight, and most of those sources validate our own already standing biases and perceptions. We don't go to media to see other perceptions and other opinions. We go to media to validate our view of the world. Guys, that's incredibly destructive and corrosive for us. We got to stop doing that. There's nothing wrong with going to media sources that reinforce your viewpoint. But we should also say to ourselves, well, what's a contrary viewpoint? What does somebody else think about this? How might they look at that? When I was in my job, I used to have a television set in the back of the room, a huge screen, and I had a quad setup. I watched BBC, CNN, Fox News, and Al Jazeera. And I had it on for the 16 hours or so a day that I worked. And I would often think to myself, I'm looking at four total different views of the world around us. They're covering different things. What they're choosing to cover, their storyline is often very different. Their characterization of the activity of these images is totally different. I just thought we got to be more discerning. Then lastly, the third and final thing I would highlight, we have got to figure out how we can be more effective in bringing together government and the private sector to come up with solutions to problems. We're living in this incredibly complicated world in which technology is becoming more and more integrated in everything we do. It's becoming more and more complicated. It's becoming more and more difficult to understand. And yet, we turn to government, for example, and say, we'll come up with a regulatory and a legal regime for this. Take AI as an example. AI is a technology that's being developed in the commercial world. If you look at the level of knowledge about AI, for example, among most government policymakers and decision makers, it isn't particularly high. Not a criticism, an observation. I can remember one time, and this was again during the Obama era, I'm sitting around the table, we're about to make a recommendation to him, and I'm thinking to myself, not one of us has been a CEO or has run a business. Most of us have spent our entire lives in government, and yet we're about to make a recommendation to the President of the United States that if he adopts this recommendation, is going to have major implications for industry, for competitive economic advantage. And yet there aren't a lot of people who've actually practiced this and done this for a living. Maybe we need to think about how we create a broader team or broader pool so that when we're actually teeing up decisions and we're making, you know, regulatory and policy kind of arrangements, there's a much greater appreciation for the dimensions of technology, for example, because the price of getting this wrong is getting higher and higher for us. It's not getting lower, it's getting higher. So that argues to me, we ought to think about maybe a different kind of approach in some areas to the way we do things. With that, thank you all very, very much for your time. I'm mindful that we've gone long.
We have, but it was fascinating. Mike Rogers, thank you very much. Please thank the Admiral.